Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everag's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're still here in Amsterdam, back with a little bit of an interesting political update from the Netherlands. Of course, the GDT lead into a very positive event number 356, and then, of course, chart of the week.
So we have been here when there's been an announcement of the outcome of an election that was held ages ago, it seems.
6 months.
6 months. Where a coalition has formed, an unlikely coalition of parties that were directly opposed in the election itself. You could say cobbled together a government, Joe, or cobbled together leadership. Government is another thing, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So they came out last week, we trawled through this stuff. It's quite interesting, don't you think? Have you ever seen anything like this?
No, it is really interesting. And obviously the BBB party is a farmer activist party that is part of this coalition government with, as you say, some quite strange bedfellows. But the policy position that came out last week, and we Google translated it from Dutch to English, has got some really interesting words about agriculture, talking about farmers leading the way, guts and glory, and a few policy positions that were interesting to us, particularly around the nitrate and phosphate issues that the Netherlands livestock industry is facing, Steve, and discussion about aligning those policies with neighbouring countries. So there's testing of water rather than the whole of the Netherlands being labelled sensitive area, and also no more forced reduction of livestock and working on the derogation with the European Union. So some really interesting policy positions there, Steve, that it'll be interesting to see what happens next. There's some healthy scepticism amongst the people we've talked to, though.
Yeah. So quite a lot of the statements in there, particularly those that deal with immigration, deal with what the country can do in terms of changing the policy on nitrogen, are simply counter to EU law. And, one of the coalition partners, Wilders, of course, well known for his very strong stance on migration or, no migration. So things like that are, in there. So here's a group that have put together essentially a manifesto where large parts are considered by a lot of people we've spoken to in the last week to be unworkable. And simply, it was a good term I read, this is gesture politics. Putting out a statement, no chance it's going to be delivered, and blame someone else down the track, I guess. But the detail on agriculture, particularly the dairy impacts, was really interesting, just the extent of that.
Absolutely. Just to see, farmers really at the heart of a European government is really interesting. So we'll see where it goes, but they've still got to form a government, as you said, still got to appoint ministers, even a prime minister. So there's a long way to go, Steve.
Yeah, and I think the take on dairy would be this just kicks it down the road. Yep. Dairy farmers, there won't be any decisions, there won't be anything forced. So they get further time to operate, and really the policies around this are saying, we just want you to go back to doing what you were doing. More room for manure.
Yeah, that was a memorable phrase. Don't put that on the tourist brochures. Yeah, interesting stuff. So, leading into the GDT, Stephen, the futures markets were a little bit more positive in the last week or so.
Yeah, we've seen that continued run up in US cheese, pushing pretty high now. That created a great deal of interest about how long that lasts, but what it's doing to the complex around the world. The other thing, looking at skim milk powders, we've seen an uplift in both New Zealand and European skim futures in the last couple of weeks, which is quite interesting. As things in Europe, it's more, I guess, to do with we're seeing limits on EU milk. Naturally, we've got to a subdued peak, a late subdued peak, and that's less availability, and the cheese market's holding it together. The butter market in Europe still staying quite firm. Tight cream supplies, milk won't grow, warm weather's here. We've seen the ice cream queues ourselves. So there's a run on ice cream that's taken quite a bit of cream out. That's contributing to this, I guess. So into the event, Joe. Bit to talk about.
Yeah, there is a bit to talk about. The index was up 3.3% overall, and fats have continued that very long rally, Steve. AMF is now on its 18th consecutive event without the price falling. And do you know how much that has added in terms of the price, Steve?
I don't, Joe. But you're about to tell me.
Yep, $3,075 a tonne for the C2 contract. That's remarkable, and one of the longest rallies, if not the longest rally we've seen on GDT.
Yeah, I think it is. Yep. Across there, powder's a little better. We'll come on to that. Cheddar goes against the grain, and something we haven't got there is mozzarella, which caught back up. But cheese has just come back into line with the firmer market in the US. I think that's it. So little change really.
Yeah.
In that.
Yep.
In that result, demand was really strong, particularly for butter. That looks similar to the last event, only that dark bar is a lot higher. And when you think about the volumes have been pared back through this period to half, so that's probably normal, a normal firm volume of demand. But this is, naturally twice what you'd expect. So it is supporting the price.
And interesting, Chinese buyers accounted for over half of the volume on offer this time, Steve, for butter?
They did for butter, yes, that's correct. So that's a welcome return because they'd been holding back a bit.
Sure. Moving
into the other major highlights and looking at North Asian buying of skim milk powder, it was one of the lowest. We said that last time. This was a little worse. We go to Southeast Asia, though, they came back and helped. So counter that a bit, and there were some European buyers with increased volumes coming out of Europe on the platform. So that's encouraging and creating a bit of stability there.
Sure.
With whole milk powder, Joe,
that improved a little from China. So, sort of in line with a few events ago, but still under half of the sales volume accounted for by China. And Southeast Asian demand a little bit better, Steve, compared to the last couple of events. So, a reasonably broad-based demand there apart from
the Middle East.
Yeah.
And if I was to overlay the price chart behind this, Joe, you'd see the rising prices. And as we talked about that last week, are we going to see a trend? And they did back off as prices rose. And this interesting whole milk powder discount to synthetic value of powder, that got a little wider with, stronger skim and very strong AMF. So that's, a small increase in whole milk powder. So that's to be expected. But it's making that more tantalising, isn't it?
Sure. And again, my favourite, AMF, despite that very long rally, that discount to butter in fat equivalent terms is still bigger just because butter moved up as well this time around, Steve. So interesting stuff there.
Yep. Looking at where that leaves us, these were futures results before the event. So it's, it's a pretty good carry there for European skim milk powder in that chart. And New Zealand is once again the cheapest. Looking at butter, this is a fairly horrible chart. If you're sitting in New Zealand looking at forward values and worry about the risks, I guess the risk we keep talking about is that the developing world won't keep buying butterfat at such high prices. It seems a few others believe that too. So that's pulled those futures way below, and maybe there's a risk for European fat prices coming with that big gap emerging there. Wait and see that. And the cheese convergence occurs a little further out into Q4. It'll be interesting in the short term as to how long that high US price lasts.
Yeah.
Chart of the week, Joe, what do you have?
Chart of the week. Well, just to round out the discussion about China, Steve, we've got some Chinese import data. This is data from up until April. Chinese imports on a milk solids equivalent basis down 7% for the first 4 months of 2024 and down on that rolling moving annual total basis as well. So you can just see across the board there, skim milk powder in particular, well down year on year, and that's really reflecting very high inventories within China for skim milk powder, and I guess goes to explain the GDT action as well. Some, perhaps brighter spots there in terms of cheese, but, not a whole lot of joy in terms of import volumes there, Steve.
No, when you look at the rolling trend, Joe, that's it's got a distinct downward look about it, hasn't it? I mean, we had a little bit of a rally late last year, but that's continuing. I mean, it's back to 2019 volumes in overall trade.
So still after that big demand revival from China, it's proving elusive, Steve.
All right. Well, that's all from us. We are heading to Ukulele very early tomorrow morning. Be there for the rest of the week. And so next week we'll come back with a few of the things we glean from talking to people around the traps. at that event. We'll be back next week. Thanks for watching.